Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Soil Builders Education and Action Healthy Soils, Healthy Lawns webinar. My name is Natasha Duarte. I'm the director of the Composting Association of Vermont, and I'm joined today by Kris Stepenuck from UVM and Lake Champlain Sea Grant and Jack Eaton from Filtrexx. And we're going to be talking about healthy soils and healthy lawns. So I'm going to give just a little bit of background about the Soil Builders program and the workshops that we've been running. We developed this, it's a series of workshops, and we developed it really to provide some compost related and healthy soil related eco-literacy for folks in the Lake Champlain Basin. So decision makers and professionals, but also citizen activists and advocates for both healthy soil and water quality. And so throughout this series, we'll talk about specific benefits from using compost, as well as how and why to modify some current practices to actually see those benefits, to manifest those benefits. The Soil Builder workshop topics include soil health and water quality and how those two things are connected. Drivers for clean water and healthy soil sort of gets into the regulations and some policy stuff. And we did that as a pre-recorded one. And then we have a whole series of best management practices for compost and compost-based products. And this webinar tonight is part of those best management practice series. And then we also have had one education and action, sort of the next steps, like, okay, now we know all this good information. How do we do it? How do we get this done? And so we've had one of those with some watershed groups, and we're hopefully gonna be having one more of those as well. All of this material is recorded as well as additional resources, and you can find that on compostingvermont.org/soil builders, and it's all there on one page. I'd like to thank my project partners, my core team, Athena Lee Bradley, Mark Companion, who's no longer with Lake Champlain Sea Grant, but he's got us started on this project. Chuck Dupre, Brian Giroux, Deb Nair, and Ellie Ventura. Additional thanks to my board of directors, and of course, our fabulous guest panelists who join us for some of these webinars. I'd also like to thank the Lake Champlain Basin Program and the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission, who are funding this work. Just a quick promo for some upcoming Soil Builder sessions. Deb Nair is going to be doing a webinar on compost for soil function and disease suppression. That's December 9th from 1 to 2:30. Probably next week, we'll start circulating registration information for that. You can stay tuned to that. So just a quick outline for today's webinar. We're going to hear a little bit about the Lanta Lake Coalition, soil testing, the why, when, how of doing it, as well as how to interpret results, some best management practices or BMPs for top dressing lawns with compost, and thinking about other uses for lawn space as well. And then, as I said, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A. I like to start these webinars just by pointing out that the state of Vermont does have a definition of healthy soil in statute. Healthy soil means soil that has a well-developed porous structure, is chemically balanced, supports diverse microbial communities, and has an abundance of organic matter. And what's fascinating to me and what I love about this is this definition is actually part of the Clean Water Act. And so that really underscores the connection between healthy soil and a well-functioning soil and water quality, that clean water that we're all looking to support as well. And so these two things really go hand in hand. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Kris, who is going to give us a little bit of background about lawn and the Lanta Lake Coalition that both of our organizations are part of. Kris.
Thanks, Natasha, and hi, everybody. Thanks for being here tonight. So to get us started thinking about this map of lawn in the United States, did you know that lawns are now about 3 times as large as any irrigated crop in the US, from our homes, suburban, urban, and rural areas? And we know that from NASA, there was a study in 2015 that the US urban lawns or urban, rural, suburban lawns make up about 63,000 square miles, or something about the size of Texas. That's a lot of lawn. And so we have an opportunity with this lawn to be able to do something that could help water quality. And that's where this lawn to lake effort comes from. So we know in the Lake Champlain watershed that acre for acre, urban areas are contributing more phosphorus to the lake than rural sources. But in the lake, in the basin overall, there's actually more agricultural land. So if we had more urban land, there's only about 6% urban in the Lake Champlain watershed, then urban sources might contribute more. But in our watershed, because there's about, I think it's 14% agricultural, there is more incoming phosphorus. What that does in the lake is contribute to cyanobacteria blooms that you might have heard about this summer with beach closings that have been going on even into the fall this year. We also know that in Chittenden County, almost about three quarters of the people's lawns don't need phosphorus fertilizer because there's plenty in the soil. It's holding it there. It's there to help the grass grow. And we also know on the other side of the coin, and thinking about lawns, if we can create a healthy lawn, that actually means creating a healthy soil. And healthy soils, healthy lawns are going to hold more water. They're going to make the lawn more drought resistant. They're going to allow the plants to have increased resilience, the plants being the grass, to pests or disease if those grass plants can grow long roots and have healthy soils to get nutrients from. And it can also save homeowners money in loss to erosion or in having to irrigate, because the lawn has been set up in a way that it's able to access water more easily and nutrients more readily.
Could I just jump in here for just a second about watering? One of the things, I used to do irrigation for a period of time, and homeowners have a tendency, once they get an irrigation system, to feel like they need to use it all the time. And an irrigation system actually should be a method of using the least amount of water possible. So you're not targeting over maybe an inch a week at the most, and you want long, deep irrigation rather than we turn it on 3 times a day.
Great points, Jack.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the best ways to save money, especially if you're in a city that charges you for your water. You want to use as little as possible, do it at the right time of day. Nobody wants to be up at 4 o'clock in the morning watering their lawn so that it's done by the time the sun comes up. But an irrigation system will do that for you. But typically we see people trying to way over their water their lawn if they use an irrigation system.
Great to know. Thanks. So this is a picture on the right hand side of the watershed or the land area that drains to Lake Champlain. We're super unique in that there is about 19 times as much land in the watershed as there is lake area. And that's very significant because it means what we do on the land really impacts the water quality. If you compare to the Great Lakes watersheds, any of the Great Lakes in the Midwest, those land to water ratios are more like 1 or 2 to 1. And here we're 19 to 1. So again, the lesson is we all have a role. There's an all-in approach that's been named in the past few years. And whatever we can do to help water quality, each of us has an action that can assist. So this campaign called Lanta Lake was developed for specifically related to something called Raising the Blade in 2016, but also talk a little bit about a campaign that happened within Lanta Lake prior to 2016 in a little bit. But the 2016 one, we were talking about raising the blade, meaning put your lawnmower blade up higher so that you can do something to help water quality. And I'll explain what that is. We started this effort targeting it to homeowners, and then we've recently expanded it to businesses and municipalities to try to encourage homeowners by seeing their favorite business or their town becoming engaged in the effort. And again, the goals are to reduce stormwater runoff by creating healthy soils, by creating healthy lawns. And then we improve the plant and the soil health, again, the grass and the soil health. So we're using something called social marketing. And let me explain about that. So social marketing is a tool that's used to promote behavior changes. And the way it works is a specific action is identified. In this case, we said, okay, we want to have healthy, we want people to raise the blade on their lawnmower. So how can we go about doing that? Or what do we know about that? So we asked people about what are your barriers to putting your lawnmower blade up? What would motivate you to put your lawnmower blade up, and up meaning to 3 inches is our goal. And then you hear what people have to tell you, and then you design your outreach to boost up the motivations and to break down the barriers. So I'll share with you a little bit about what we learned here in the Lake Champlain Basin by asking people about their barriers and their motivations to adopting high mowing practices. So we surveyed people through Front Porch Forum and through Cornell Cooperative Extension and other New York-based distribution lists. And we heard back from over 1,000 people who were willing to share with us their lawn mowing practices and habits. It was equally distributed between the 2 states. What we found is that almost everybody is mowing their own lawn. About 88% of homeowners are mowing their own lawns. Only about 10% are working with a hired company, or 1% have somebody else or some way else of going about doing it, whether it's a landlord or otherwise. So we knew, okay, we're going to target our message to homeowners. And what we found out, people are using a number of different kinds of mowers, everything from a riding mower or a gas push mower or electric push mower or non-powered reel. And then we have other people, and I love people in the basin who are using goats and alpaca and scythes and whatnot. So we know that on average, across all of these mower types, that 75% of people are cutting their grass shorter than 3 inches, which is the goal height to have it be most healthy. So we said, okay, we're gonna work on this and trying to educate people about raising their mower blade. We also found out, we asked at what height people are mowing. So we know that the 2 to 3 inch height mowers, over half of them think the grass is healthier at this length, and that's why they're mowing it to the 2 to 3 inches. We know that the people who cut their grass shorter, 1 to 2 inches, almost half thinks that it looks best that way. That we took the easy button from Staples, and we said, we're going to work and maybe target our efforts early on, at least towards the people who are mowing at 2 to 3 inches, because it's an easy sell, because it's the truth that grass at higher than 3 inches is actually healthier. And we decided to not necessarily target the 1 to 2 inch height mowers or the shorter mowers, because it's hard to convince somebody that it looks better longer when they think it looks better shorter. So we are targeting mostly the 2 to 3 inch height mowers. And next slide, please. And again, what they told us, their key motivations, 2/3 said they would mow higher if the lawn was healthier. They said about that many said if it was good for the environment. Both of these are true. And about 60% said they would do this mowing higher if it was something that they had to do less often. So our campaign doesn't actually help with the mowing of less often, and I'll explain that. But this picture of this robotic mower is a separate campaign. If you would, I forgot to drop in the link, but it's go.uvm.edu/mow, M-O, not M-O-W. And there's a blog about a robotic mower and the pros and cons of using a robotic mower to save you time, as well as following the other practices of Raise the Blade campaign. So the reason that we're asking people to mow 3 inches or higher, so setting that mower blade high, the longer their grass is, the longer the roots are going to be. And this picture on the right is a demonstration root box that we have grown in the greenhouses. And you can see that the roots get very long pretty quickly. We grew some this summer. Within about 5 weeks, the roots were already a foot long in native clays and native sands. With the clay soils having much healthier looking grass than the sandy soils. So that's another lesson in nutrients. But we know that when you mow high, you're holding the soil in place because you've got roots that are developing. Those roots that are getting down deeper into the soil are able to help aerate the soil. They're improving the ability of water to go into the soil, and then they're able to use the water that's coming in and retaining that within the soil for another reason too, that I will explain in a minute. We also know that as the grass is healthier, it's able to grow and expand within the system, and so it can outcompete weeds if it's healthier. It can also protect the soil from evaporation to be able to hold water by shading the soil and it helps to limit the kind of spreading of weed seeds across, because the grass is again taking up more of the space because it's healthier. So the second thing that we promote within Raise the Blade is to let the clippings lie in place and decompose. So basically what this is doing is rather than paying at the store to buy a commercial fertilizer, you're using the grass to fertilize itself. The grass will decompose in place. It's going to bring in nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium. It's going to help the soil build what's called organic matter. And organic matter is making, the more organic matter that's in the soil, the more water that soil can hold. And so that will help with a rainstorm. If you're creating healthy soils, those soils can hold more water. Less water is going to run off into your local stream or brook or into the lake. And that means that we'll be reducing stormwater runoff, which means we're holding nutrients in where we want them on the lawn, rather than sending them off into the lake where they can cause algal blooms. It also can save time if you're letting the clippings lie in place, because you don't have to spend the time bagging or raking or picking them up. So related to the water infiltration, just to give you some statistics. So again, if you're letting the clippings decompose in place, you can, with every 1% increase in organic matter in the top 6 inches of soil, can hold much more water per acre. That's about 27,000 gallons of water per acre than if you were not allowing the organic matter to be built up. And it can hold about 20 times its weight in water. So it's sort of fun fact for your next event. And then it also, again, because it's able to hold that water, it's not letting it run off, like say compacted soil. It's going to run over the top of that out into the street, down into the storm drain. This is able to hold that water in place. So one thing that we did find out in our survey of the 28 towns in each of the 2 states is that a lot of people are already leaving their clippings in place to decompose, which is great. So by mower type, it's as high as 80%, which makes sense for the non-powered reel mowers, and about down to 78%. I guess with the alpacas and whatnot, that makes sense as well, though it might be going ingesting instead of decomposing in place, or maybe it's decomposing in a different way. Anyway, if you click it one more time, there's going to be a check mark that comes here. So you're all doing the right thing. Many people are doing the right thing. And so that's great. And then we have a third piece of the Raise the Blade campaign. So next slide, please. And that is to take, when you mow, the goal is to only mow about 1/3 of the length of the grass blade in any one cutting. And one way that you can think about this, I call it like doing the smell test. So when you cut grass short, if somebody's mowing their grass with a mower, you know, with that fresh grass smell, that's actually maybe like it's a scream from the grass saying, I'm harmed, I need to grow. So what happens is the grass, when you cut it short, it's thinking its only thing in life is that it wants to photosynthesize, it wants to grow, and it needs to have its leaves to be able to do that. And so that it has to grow back the leaves quickly. And therefore it is not expending its energy to store or create its roots. It's more spending its energies to grow the grass again. And so if you can't smell the grass after you've mowed it, that's good, because that means that the grass is not shocked in awe of what's happened to it. And that means that the grass is actually able to take some of its energy from the sun, from the blades that you have left a little bit longer, and it's going to store nutrients and energy within its roots. It's going to make them longer. It's going to store more for the winter to make it be able to make it through the winter better. And so the other thing that will happen is, as you are having these healthier soils, letting those clippings decompose in place, letting the organic matter become greater within the soil, you're going to be able to support organisms living in the soil. Decomposers, for every teaspoon of healthy soil, if it's really good, there's more organisms in that teaspoon than there are people on the planet. That's another fun fact. And it's going to also help the soil and the grass be able to obtain nutrients. Again, that's a fertilizer, it's decomposing in place. the organisms are able to do what's called nitrogen fixation. So taking nitrogen from the air and then transferring that to where it's usable. So there's some fascinating things that can happen in sort of a symbiotic relationship between the biota that are living in the soil and the plants that are using nutrients, or themselves that are able to use that for their own existence. And then soils with more organic matter can also kind of stick together better, and also let the, again, kind of like the lesson with the roots being longer, they'll be able to hold more water in place. So I talked about, that's our raise the blade. So raise your blade to 3 inches, let the clippings lie in place, and cut no more than a third of the length of the blade in any one cutting, which Jack might say this too, is it doesn't necessarily save you time unless you're using some other way of getting the grass mowed. But the first program from the Lanta Lake group happened prior to my time in this state, but it was called Don't Pee on Your Lawn, and P being the representation for phosphorus. And the lesson there is that in both Vermont and New York, and I think this is the next slide. Oops, sorry, it's not, but I'll say it anyway. So in both Vermont and New York, it's actually illegal to put phosphorus fertilizers on your lawn without a soil test. First, that says that you need to have phosphorus-based fertilizers to help the grass grow. What we know, again, back to our survey, is that a lot of people in the basin are not fertilizing. In rural areas, 82% are not. In urban areas, 3/4 are not. And in suburban areas, about 60% are not fertilizing. So that's super great. If you are going to fertilize, maybe a lesson would be to do that in the fall, and that helps the grass hold that over the winter and kind of charge itself up for the next season. And so again, in Vermont and New York, unless you have a soil test, which you will learn about next, you wouldn't be applying a phosphorus-based fertilizer. The only exception to that rule is if you're establishing a new lawn, and then you are allowed to use a phosphorus-based fertilizer.
Thank you so much, Kris. We're going to switch presenters now from Kris to Jack, who's going to take us through the soil testing piece as well as top dressing.
Really, soil testing is a fundamental thing that you want to do, no matter whether you're starting a lawn or whether you have a lawn that may be perfectly healthy, but you still want to know what's going on in that soil. It is one thing that manufacturers of seed and hydroseeding supplies and all of those kind of things really focus on now, because it's the basis of how you are going to grow. So that's why we soil test. We're going to talk a little bit about how to soil test, what to expect, and then what you want to do next. So these are the things that you're going to see in a soil test. You're going to find out the pH of the soil, the macronutrients, the micronutrients. And honestly, through a good portion of my career, early on anyway, that's where we stopped. We wanted to look at the NPK and the pH and maybe some micronutrient stuff. Now, we really realize that the organic content of that soil really means a lot more to the way you're going to grow than anything else. And I've come to believe that if you get your organics right, the rest of it will come together, and you'll have to do very little of these other things. The pH will come together. You won't have to do a whole lot of fertilizing, and the micronutrients will solve themselves because they'll be in the compost and the organic content that you have. So how do we soil test? It sounds, I guess, to some, when you get somebody to come in and do it, maybe like it's a complicated thing, but it's really not. You need something to dig with, garden trowel, shovel, spade, or an auger or a soil sampler, something to collect the sample in as you go. So you need a bag or a box. You want that to be sterile. So I'm just going to throw that out there. You don't want to just grab something out of the cupboard and go out there and start sampling with it, because you have no idea. Let's just use pH for an example. If you had tomato soup in that bowl that you're mixing in beforehand, you're probably going to get a very acidic result, whether it's acidic or not. So you want a sterile container, either a box that's provided with the soil testing or a plastic bag. And you're going to go around and you're going to collect samples. You're going to want to mix those samples together. So you want a big enough container to hold those in. You can cut a triangular section of soil out about 4 to 6 inches deep and set it aside. Cut a thin leaf from that soil about a half an inch thick. You do want a soil profile here. So you do want to get, 4 to 6 inches down to the ground, into the ground if you can. Use the center section of the sample if you're doing it that way. Put this sample into a clean container and then pat the rest of the triangle back into the soil. So in the end, you end up where you can't even really see where you've taken that sample, but you want to get a good representative sample. So you want to take your sample, you want a representative sample of the entire lawn. So you want to make sure you take, it says 10 samples here in a zigzag pattern, but it really depends on the size of the lawn that you're doing. And I'm also going to suggest that you look at what you're looking for. So if you have sections of your lawn that are having problems, those are probably the only sections that we want to sample from this time around, or areas that we're going to want to top dress. And we'll talk a little bit about choosing that in just a little bit. But we're going to take an area, we're going to take our samples from that area, mix them together, and then we're going to take about a cup of that. The soil testing lab doesn't need 4 pounds of soil from you. They need just about a cup in a bag, and that's what's going to go to the off for soil testing. This is what you're going to have for a form. We've got a couple of different ones here, and each one's going to have some things that you're going to want to know. Where did you take the sample? Some sampling may want to know some characteristics of, well, a lot of them want to know what the crop is that you're sampling for. Some of them may want to know if you have a problem, so they've got something to go on. But you're going to have some kind of a sheet like this to fill out. And then you'll get back, which is something like this. So you'll get the texture of the soil, the amount of sand, silt, and clay in that sample. Those are all things that are specifically talking about. So when we talk about soil texture, we talk about soil texture a lot as far as the structure of soils. It has nothing to do with how much organic material or anything it has in it. And so that's a whole separate issue. We're going to get pH. If you look at these samples, the pHs are actually a little bit high. I don't think this came from New England. We would typically see, and you may see in some soils, especially on newer areas, pHs that may be down as low as the high 4s or low 5s. Those are things we're definitely going to want to bring that pH up. And then organic material, again, that first sample, 8.7, pretty impressive. If we get into the next one down, which is a clay loam, at 2.4, I'm going to say that doesn't percolate water very well. And that may be part of your problem with that lawn. And then the next one at 4.1 would be, in my mind, just about a bare minimum that we want for organic material, matter in that kind of a soil. And then some samples, if you send them off to a manufacturer, they may send you back results, or even the state may send you back some recommendations for what you want to put on that lawn. You can use some of that. Some of that I might tell you to, certainly if it's coming from a manufacturer, know that manufacturer is trying to sell you product. So, and even the state ones are going to be very, in my mind, slanted toward an NPK analysis that we might want to look at secondarily, if you will. So getting on to top dressing. So we have a soil sample test back, and we have some idea that we know what we want to do. And now we want to look at what we're going to use for that top dressing. So why would we want to use compost? The timing of that application, what compost to use, how to apply, to aerate or not aerate, and a little bit on seeding we're going to talk about as we go along here. So this was a little bit of a controversial slide, a little bit. So typically golf courses top dress their greens with sand. That isn't always the case now, but traditionally that was the way golf courses went about handling top dressing. And the sand is actually put there to reduce the organic content and improve porosity on highly managed tees and greens. They do a lot of things to those tees and greens. They may not be the same goals that you have in mind with your home lawn. You want to reduce the amount of input that you're putting into that grass, as opposed to a golf course that just wants really green grass and is cutting it in a way that may not be conducive to good, healthy grass growth. So a tee or a green that is cut at a quarter of an inch is not the way we want to have our home lawns in most cases. So we're usually looking at increasing the organic content, unless we have a really good soil, adding soil biology. We'll talk a little bit about that. Improving soil pH. Can't stress enough, getting your soil pH right and getting the organic content right are the two things that will get your lawn the healthiest possible. And then improving the soil's ability to retain moisture and nutrients. Organic material, as it's been pointed out before, holds on to a tremendous amount of moisture and does a lot of things to improve a soil's ability to stay in place, to avoid erosion, and to create a healthy soil. You're finding a lot of these companies are starting to learn this too. You know, there are some manufacturers out there that are producing products right now that suddenly have a lot of organics in them, whether it be compost, or in most cases it's humic acid or some other organic product. And I was talking to one of those manufacturers one time, and I'm like, "You've got a lot of good stuff in the soil." And he goes, "Well, it turns out it's really good. You know, all of those things are really good at retaining moisture and making a soil sticky," as he put it, to hold together. And I just wanted to pass along a quick story on the golf course front here. When I graduated college, I worked for a summer on a golf course in Loon Lake, New York. And the greens, the head greenskeeper there had been there forever. His father mowed the course with horses in his day. And in the fall, he would do a rather controversial thing, and he was almost burying the grass. You could almost not see the grass when we were done at all, with this soil that he would get out of the woods. And he didn't tell me or anyone else where it was. He would go out in the woods and find it. And lo and behold, about 10 years later, I was at a turf conference, and one of the speakers was talking about Loon Lake this and Loon Lake that, and what they were doing on the golf course. And the reason they were doing that was because this golf course in New York State had almost no disease problems at all. And they were trying to figure out what this mystery soil was that Leo, that head greenskeeper, was using. Well, it turned out it was just leaf waste, leaf compost that was coming out of the woods. But it had so much organic material and so much biology in it that it was keeping those greens and tees from developing any serious fungal problems. So just kind of a key side note. So when do I top dress? I'm going to tell you that any time of the year is probably okay to top dress, except in the heat of the middle of the summer. A lot of people think winter is the toughest time on grass. I really believe that the middle of the summer, especially if it's a droughty summer, is probably a harder time for grass to survive than winter. Grass goes dormant in the winter, and it'll be fine. And if you let it, it'll be fine in the summertime too. The worst thing you can do to your lawn is water it inconsistently during a summer drought. It's very hard. Grass doesn't know what to do. And you'll see a lot of die off during those times. Spring is a great time. And it's a great time if you want to add some cool season grasses. So if you want to seed, it can be a good time to do that. You want to go light at this time of year. Early fall is the best time for compost only applications. And then we get into late fall applications. That's when you can really get into heavier applications. So if you want to change some of the, maybe you have some divots or some, grading issues that you want to handle, late fall is generally a better time to do that. It's also a good time to add cool season grasses. And it's the only time that you would add natives or pollinators. So and we're going to talk a little bit about transforming some of your lawn into other things. If you wanted to start doing that with some areas and you wanted to add some natives and some pollinators, top dressing, a light top dressing with natives or pollinators in the late fall, dormant seeding is a good way to go about starting that. Never put any of those down in the spring or summer, though. Not going to work out very well. As one thing that I looked at when I was getting ready to do this talk, everything that I looked at that talked about using compost for top dressing talked about mature, well finished compost, and never talked about the feedstocks. And I think the feedstocks can be very important in this. So I don't prefer to use, and certainly you wouldn't in Vermont or New York, you wouldn't use a manure-based compost. Very high in nutrient content. Many studies that'll prove that is going to leach some nutrient from it. And the same thing can happen with food waste. Food waste, a lot of times, if it's naturally composted, is generally done with yard waste anyway. And so as long as you're getting a good product, you'll be fine there. But I prefer yard waste compost. And by yard waste, I mean wood, leaf waste, all of that's been well composted and is mature. And if you're going to buy that product, you want to get it from a source that is going to supply you with good testing so you know what you're getting and you're putting on the lawn. Right. So again, we talked about manure-based compost, and I bunch all manure into one category, no matter where it comes from. Whether all of them can have different issues, but all of them, a lot of people top dress with biosolids or animal manure. If you use a tiny bit, it can be an okay thing. Certainly not what we would want to do on anything that we're talking about in the presence of this talk. And it's usually too hot. And by hot, I mean it's got too much nitrogen, too much phosphorus, which can be a problem. Food waste, like I said, is a whole different animal. And for the purposes of this talk, would generally be mixed with some kind of yard waste product. Yard waste is going to have a lower nutrient content. It's great for building soil structure. So I'm not one for really fine compost. I like some structure in my compost, some twigs and maybe some small stones in there that are going to help me build my soil structure. So bottom line in all of that is do good soil testing, use certified compost if you're not going to use compost that you're making yourself, and there's nothing wrong with that. And have good test results, both in the soil testing and the compost that you're using. So how do we top dress? This may come as, so I've owned blower trucks and $300,000 pieces of equipment to top dress with. That's great. You're not going to do that on your home lawn. I still think the best way to top dress is with a shovel and a wheelbarrow. I'm going to fill my wheelbarrow with the compost. I'm going to mix in some seed if I want to mix in seed, or I can hand cast my seed. I like to go below and above. So if I'm going to top dress, I'll throw some seed out. And then throw out my compost and then do a little bit of seed on top of that, or you can mix it right in with the compost. And I think that works probably the best way of any, as long as you're getting it well mixed throughout your compost. It's labor intensive, but it's a great way of doing it. And generally, it's going to make you do something we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is maybe we don't need to do the entire lawn all the time. Maybe we're just trying to spot hit the areas that we think we have a problem. There are machines out there that you can rent, or if you're going to do a lot of it, buy, that are walk behind compost spreaders, or tow behind compost spreaders that will go behind a tractor. Think manure spreader, a better distributing manure spreader, I guess, would be one way of putting it. They're available. If you're going to do your whole lawn, it might be a way to go, but not required. And then I'm going to urge you not to ever try and put compost through a fertilizer spreader. I've seen it in a couple of places. Unless it's specifically designed compost to go through a traditional fertilizer spreader, you're not going to get good results with it, in my opinion. Aerate, never thatch. I see people with these huge piles of thatch, and look at all of this great stuff I did. All you did was took all the organic material out of your lawn. That thatch is there for a reason. We just want to keep it under control. So there are a lot of ways that we're going to go about doing that. I talked about watering already. That's one of the best ways to create a lot of thatch, by putting a lot of just a thin coating of water on them on multiple times a day or whatever, can help build a lot of thatch. It's not aeration is not required when you're doing top dressing, but I think I like it as a practice. I typically aerate when I top dress. I guess I feel like I'm getting some of that compost down into the soil, but I know that the compost is going to integrate itself into the soil rather quickly all on its own. So don't feel that you need to aerate, but I do typically aerate when I top dress. And then lastly, like I said, the compost and the aeration will naturally decompose any additional thatch. You always want some thatch layer there, and composting will help keep that in check. So this is another thing that even when I was in the business and doing top dressing all the time, people want to top dress once and I'm never going to do it again. I much prefer doing smaller amounts of compost, maybe 1/4 of an inch, no more than 1/2 an inch, more frequently, in most cases, than doing, say, a 1-inch top dressing, which is almost burying the existing grass. You might want to do that in a really poor application, but 1/2 an inch or 1/4 an inch of top dressing every other year, every 3 years, I think is a better way of building good soils. And then the quality of the materials you're using. So I haven't talked a whole lot about seed. We pretty much are talking, when we're talking lawns, we're talking about cool season grasses, bluegrass, rye, fescues. The seed industry over the last 10 or 15 years has done a great job of coming up with fescues, especially that are really good turf quality grasses. Fescues have a really much better root system than some of your other grasses, and will dig deep into the soil and make a very drought resistant lawn. And then, like I said, don't be afraid to do a small area. It's not like it's going to show up and your neighbors are all going to see that, oh, he only top dressed over there. Pick the areas that are the worst. If you've got some problem areas, hit those, and don't feel like you need to do the entire lawn. I think that some people get a little overwhelmed with the process and then say, oh, I can't possibly do that. Do a little bit to a time, even if it's just a couple of bags of bagged compost, hitting bare spots and all of that will do a tremendous amount to improve your lawn over time.
And Jack, if I can, I'll just add, I top dress my lawn with my own compost, which is essentially like you were describing a food scrap slash yard waste compost with various other materials mixed in depending on what comes my way. But I do the worst because I don't ever create that much of it at a time. I sort of like started with the worst spots and I sort of migrate my way around the lawn from year to year doing so it's sort of on almost on that 3-year cycle that you were mentioning, but I'm top dressing pretty much once a year, but a different part of my lawn.
But a different part of your lawn.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I like using the compost for top dressing, and my lawn is green. It's not a perfectly, turf grass type of lawn, but because it's a smaller system, I'm not necessarily getting that hot compost or the thermophilic compost that will kill seeds. I don't really mind if other things grow. I prefer to use that in my lawn than as opposed to in my gardens. And I know that some seeds are, from my compost are still going to be viable and they're going to grow, but I'm mowing it. And so It's not really a problem there. And so that has worked for me. And, that of course wouldn't be as suitable for a lawn that is really, like a nice fescue, like a really tight grass seed lawn. But
so I'm going to just throw in there that you're right. You're going to get some weed seed that grows in that, but you are mowing it and you're going to mow out 70-80% of that at least just by mowing it. You're not going to have to treat it in any way.
Right.
I'm like you. I don't care if I've got a few dandelions. Dandelions throw out a great root system and, a great taproot and really are good soil builders. So are a lot of the other weeds, if you will.
Clover. We end up with a lot of clover in our lawn somehow.
So clover, I'm just going to throw this out there. If I could get people to switch to clover as a lawn, I think clover is the best ground cover there is. White clover. It's short. It rarely needs to be mowed. If you're afraid of mowing or don't want to mow, plant clover. You're going to have one period of the year where it's going into flower, and maybe you don't like the flowers and you want to get rid of that. It's drought resistant. It's just a great plant in my mind. If we could get people to go to more clover lawns, I think we'd be in a much better place. And they're nitrogen fixers, so you don't need to add nitrogen at all.
Yep.
So keeping your mower blade sharp. Wow, you guys are looking in my backyard. I haven't sharpened my mower blade since spring. So usually I try and get it at least a couple of times a year. Landscapers are doing it once a week, sharpening their blades. Now, obviously, they're using their mowers a lot more. Mow often. You can't mow. In my mind, once a week is the least amount of times you want to mow. And I know nobody wants to hear that. But your grass actually wants as little as possible taken off of it and will grow the best if you can do that. Overseeding your lawn once a year, if you have bare spots and all of that, overseeding with a good quality seed mix is and throw a little compost in there as you go. I wouldn't overseed without compost. So if I'm hitting my bare spots, I'm going to hit those with a mixture of compost and seed. Use preventive pest management. Some of these things that we're talking about as far as mowing and the height of your grass are the best things you can do to keep pests out of your lawn. All right. Insects don't like lawns that are moist and lush. They're looking for and this goes for any pest. They're looking for the plants that they can get to that are already a little bit weaker. So if we are vigorously growing our grass and not using a lot of added nitrogen, phosphorus to it, that's one of the best ways we can keep pests out of our lawns. And then as far as considering reducing the size of your lawn, like I said, you can replace grass with other landscape plants. I'm not a big fan of mowing, and that's what I try and do at my house. I've got gardens as much as possible. So raised bed gardens, plant your vegetable garden out there. If you're going to use mulching to, around your plants, try and use some natural mulches around your plants. And you'd be surprised what you'll bring into your yard if you create some more edge effect by some of the things that you see in this picture. So putting in a small water feature and having, plants. So there's a variety of different ecosystems, if you will, in your lawn. You'll bring a lot more insects and birds, and if you like them, snakes and other amphibians into your yard. You'd be surprised at how much of that can happen.
Great, thank you so much. That sort of ends the presentation part of tonight's webinar. Before we move into Q&A, I'm just going to remind folks, and a few folks have joined late, that we do have a couple upcoming Soil Builders sessions. One is Compost for Soil Function and Disease Suppression with Deb Nair from UVM. That's December 9th. We'll be launching registration for that early next week. And then there is this static pile inoculated compost extension on-farm compost workshop. That's an in-person workshop in Highgate in Vermont on December 2nd. And the details are still coming, but we'll be circulating information about that learning opportunity as well. And then we have a couple more planned for January and early in the new year. So stay tuned for those. And one last big thank you to EPA and the New England Interstate Water Pollution Control Commission and the Lake Champlain Basin Program for making this Soil Builders program and webinar series possible. So thank you again so much. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so we can see each other if we'd like. I can always bring it back up if we want to look at any specific slides again, but I'd like to just open it up to Q&A. We did have one question, and I think you kind of touched on this, Jack, but one of the question was, how do you go from interpreting the soil test to understanding what kind of compost to use or what kind of compost application? So a lot of the soil tests, some of them may be more agricultural focused or not necessarily have, I guess if you say it's turf, they'll give you recommendations for that, but it seems to be geared more towards chemical fertilizer, as opposed to a compost. So you mentioned a little bit about the leaf and yard debris compost, which is lower nutrients, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So some soil tests are very difficult to interpret because they really do focus on NPK and maybe some on pH. I'd want to look at, so if I have, one of the things that's great about some of the yard waste compost sources that I've used is the pH of those composts is relatively high. So they'll be in the high 7s or low 8s even. So if I've got a lawn, those are great for using on lawns that, again, may have a very low pH. So if your lawn is relatively new, if you're in a subdivision that hasn't been around for a long time, you may have very low pHs. So that's one way to interpret that. Almost all of them are going to tell you to add nitrogen and phosphorus. Understand that is all based off of chemical fertilizer applications. And guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but as soon as you put a chemical fertilizer on your lawn, you begin to lose some of that nitrogen and phosphorus, especially the nitrogen. You can lose nitrogen as much as 50% in 1 or 2, hot summer days. So all of those reports that you see are based on those kind of expectations that we're going to lose a fair amount of that nitrogen right away. So don't get too caught up in, what they're telling you to put down as far as nitrogen and phosphorus. I almost never use phosphorus. Even establishing new lawns, I want to get my pH right. And if I get my pH right here in New England, you're never going to have a phosphorus problem. Now, getting your pH right is not as easy as it sounds because it takes time. All right. If I spread lime out today, it's going to take a while for that to take an effect, as much as a year. If I put compost down, in some cases, when I'm, adding a compost that's maybe a higher organic content, I find that I have better results. And I don't have any university testing behind me to say that we're getting better changes in our soil pH if we're using compost than if we were using, say, lime. Lime is a good long-term solution. But I think I've had some really good luck using compost top dressings to affect the change in pH. And yes, a lot of the compost that you're going to use, if you're using primarily yard waste compost, is going to be low in nutrient, but the way that it's affecting the soil and allowing the soil to exchange the nutrients that it has now will be a great benefit. So without looking at a specific test, it's a little bit hard to explain, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. It's all about driving that biology, right?
It is really about driving that biology. And I'm just going to throw one thing out there. I grew up in the forestry industry, or that was my early career. We talk about a tree having as much root system underneath the ground as we have above the ground. Well, imagine that you have, gosh, I don't know, in some cases 8 or 10 times as much, microorganisms feeding and living on that root system. You're really talking about a huge biotic impact that you have on the soil. And if we can get that into your lawn and moving in your lawn, then that's how you really affect, good quality lawn health.
Thanks. One of the things, and Jack, I'd be interested, Kris and I have had some conversation about this already, but maybe either of you can chime in. But one of the things that has been promoted, at least in Vermont recently, is this no mow May, where you don't mow your lawn for the entire month of May, which I did this May sort of accidentally. My life just did not arrange itself in such a way that I was even thinking about mowing my lawn during the month of May. And then it was really about knee high or a little, in some places taller. And of course, weedy and all kinds of, it was actually a really interesting experiment to see, like, oh, if you don't mow, what will grow? And, all kinds of, some really pretty flowers and all kinds of stuff grew in my lawn, my lawn in air quotes. But of course, when I mowed it, I took way more than a third of the blade because I mowed it to 4 inches. And I had to remove a lot of those clippings because it was like hay. It was just like this massive amount of biomass. And my reasoning for why that seemed okay is because all those plants had all that time to really establish a good deep root system. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't seem to knock back my plants really that much, or my lawn that much, because it had already really well established before I assaulted it by cutting off, really well over a foot of length of that. And I left a good amount, of the plant on top as well. But I just wonder if either of you want to chime in on, the what's behind this no mow May, and what, if any, you have seen or could imagine the benefits of something like that being.
Well, certainly driving the root system, I prescribe to that as well, because I've been in the landscaping business and all of this forever. So May is a rather intense month for me. And I very rarely get, the mowing I'd like to get going on. But certainly it would help drive a deep and robust root system. I think you just got to be careful about the way you dial it back, if you will, when you start mowing, that you do it the way you did, which is to do it gradually, kind of, or in my case, let your llama go out there and go wild for a little while, and then mow it down from there.
Oh, I wish. I was sort of wandering around with my lawnmower this June, thinking, God, what I would give for a passel of goats.
No, not goats.
Not goats. Oh,
not goats. Sheep. Sheep. They're wonderful animals, and they don't climb anything, and they don't.
Kris, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, so I think maybe we, as you said, we might have had this conversation. So we have these root boxes that we grow for educational purposes. So we had 12 of them this summer into this fall, and we cut them in half. So they were about a foot tall. And I mentioned them when I was talking that the roots had grown a foot in about 5 weeks. So like you, I had not cut. The idea was that we had some boxes we were going to cut to 1 inch grass, and some we were going to manage to 3 inches of grass. And I let them grow, all of them, for 5 weeks, however they were going to grow. And then we started cutting them back. So they all had very nice roots developed. And then we managed them. A great student kept cutting them kind of every other day or every third day throughout the fall. And it took, even until now that we started them in early August, you can still see that there was that great root development. And then maybe the first cutting, things were fine. So, even at 1 inch, it didn't seem to affect it. But over time, you could start to see, okay, they're shortening up a little bit. And you could still see I don't know if it was like they let them go or whatever happened. You can kind of see at the bottom where there was a few that were still long, but then they were starting to shorten up, but they were still long-ish in terms of a foot. But anyway, it seems like it's for us as an experiment too, to see, well, what does happen? And you can open the door and look at the roots and see what's going on.
I love those root boxes.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, if you're cutting at 1 inch, you're not going to be able to support all that root system. But if they're retaining some of it, that's still of great value.
Right. Yeah. And, this was fall, not spring. So it didn't have to go through a drought period and, the hard part of summer. So that maybe we should do it again next year and see what happens. If we try it in the spring, let them get established and then keep cutting short all summer and see how long it takes for them to shorten up. The other thing about No Mow May that maybe you said or not, but part of it is for the pollinators, right? So that they're happening. Yeah. So it's separate from the grass, but sort of the same, related to the grass, but.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Jack.
Is that as far when you say native pollinators, is that so that they're getting that food crop of those plants that are going to, flower during that period of time? Or is it because many of them are still in the ground and emerging?
Well, it probably is some of both, I would think. Yeah. My understanding is it has to do with allowing the pollinators to have flowering opportunity, getting out of their overwintering habitat, if that happens to be in the ground, and kind of moving out to their summer habitat.
I know a friend of mine chastised me for end of April, early May, cleaning out of all my gardens. And she just, it's like, you just wiped out, I don't know how many native pollinators. And I'm like, I'm sorry. It was all bad.
Yeah.
Continuous learning curve.
Yeah.
One of my bigger challenges was just feeling like I wasn't going to be mowing over pollinators. I mean, my lawn this year, when I was finally trying to mow, was like, but like you go out and it's just like vibrating and buzzing with all kinds of different pollinating insects. So we kind of compromised, like it's.
I think that's what it's all about is, you know what you ultimately like to do. And then you have to fit within a society that wants you to do certain things. And so we make compromises sometimes, but overall, I think we're doing better.
Yeah. And then there's also, when I mowed it was about 4 inches. I didn't actually measure it, but it was the highest setting on my mower. So there is also a limit there. And I wasn't going to go out and do it in a different way. Like I wasn't going to use a scythe or, you know, like, I mean, I was going to mow when I finally mowed, but yeah, that's a limitation.
Yeah, we've done something similar. We haven't let it grow all of May, but just letting it get behind and whatnot, and trying to kind of lower it a little bit each mow, so that, you know, the first time, okay, we're going to do as high as we possibly can, and the next time, okay, we'll get it to that 3-inch area.
So Kris, you also have mow the electric mower. Do you how can you, what is the range on that?
It goes from about, I think it's 4.5, and we never put it lower than 2.5. And the 2.5 is because what we found with the electric mower, its blades are they're the little razor blades. So we have 3 little razor blades, and if it gets too long, it pushes over, so that it runs over the grass, and so the grass actually gets longer than 3 inches. And so if you shorten it up, then it will grow up again, and then it will cut it off. But it does, I mean, basically it's just a knob that you turn to tell it what height to mow at. And to Jack's point, it mows every single day, so it's always cutting a little bit at a time.
A good alternative for that mow often tip. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, nice. Well, thank you again both so much for joining us on this webinar, and thanks to everybody for spending a little bit of your evening with us tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.